With the budget coming up, we're going to be hearing a lot about productivity in the next few weeks and the impact that poor productivity in the UK has been having on the government's finances. So in this video, we're going to dig into all of that. Welcome to Bonkers Economics. This is where we use these images that I've created to try to unpack some of the problems of the UK economy. And this is number 5 in our series, 12 Reasons Why the UK Economy is Broken. And in this one, we're going to be looking at this image here, which shows the number of lawyers in the UK economy and how that number has grown enormously in the last 40 years. And we're going to be asking, what can that tell us about the UK's productivity problem? So what is this image telling us? Well, here on the left in blue, we've got the number of solicitors per 10,000 people in the population in 1980. And then in red, we've got the number of solicitors per 10,000 today. So the question is, why do we need 3 times as many solicitors now as we needed back then? And just to be clear, I'm talking about solicitors here, but this would apply to all sorts of other professions like accountancy, professions that do these sorts of tasks. I'm not having a go at solicitors. A lot of my good friends are solicitors. I want them to be talking to me tomorrow. So it's not about picking on a particular group. We're talking about a general area of activity in the economy which has grown enormously in the last 40 years. And it's really interesting to think, what does that tell us about the productivity of the economy as a whole? So to get into that, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by productivity and specifically therefore production. Well, for that we need to understand a little bit about GDP, which is the measure of production, gross domestic product. And to get a picture of that, imagine, for example, that I walk down the road and I pick a little box of blackberries. So there's no cost, no input to that. It's completely free. I pick them out of the hedgerows and I sell them to my neighbour for £1. Okay, so it's £1 there of GDP, of production value that's being generated. And that pound reflects the value of the production, it reflects the income that I've received, and it reflects the money that my neighbour has spent. And all those 3 things independently can be measured to produce a number that we call GDP. So that's production, that's income, and that's expenditure. But we don't really need, in a sense, a measure of production, because the only way we know that my little box of blackberries is worth £1 is because somebody has paid £1 for them. So realistically, it's the amount of money that's changing hands that gives us the measure of production. It's not that we are in some specific way saying that a little box of blackberries is worth £1 and by picking them I've created £1 of value. We only know that there's £1 of value there because somebody has paid £1 and I've accepted £1 for that thing. So that's the measure of production fundamentally, the willingness of somebody to pay for something and the willingness of somebody to sell that thing for a given price. And of course, generally speaking, we don't get our things for free, like blackberries from the hedgerows. There are input costs to that. So if I make, for example, a chair and I buy wood for £100 and I sell the chair for £400, then clearly the £400 doesn't all go to me. Some of it goes to the wood supplier. And so it goes on. There's a whole chain of supply, and the amount of money that the purchaser pays for the product or the service is distributed all the way through the economy to all sorts of different people. And we saw that when we looked at this image here some weeks ago, because this is a picture of the economy from agriculture, that little thin slice on the left, right through to property and financial services, these great big red chunks on the right. And this tells you where all your money goes when you buy something. So when you buy that chair, for example, a little bit going to an insurance broker, a little bit going to a transport person, a little bit going to a retail person potentially, a little bit going to the person who grew the trees, and some of it going to the person who actually made the chair. So that's the nature of production. It gets distributed all the way through the economy. And of course, in here, we are going to find somewhere, actually in this block here, we're going to find solicitors and accountants and all those sorts of professions, management consultants, top managers, all those sorts of management activities that we think are so valuable in the economy because so much money is paid for them. So back to this question, why do we have so many more solicitors, 3 times more solicitors than we had 40 years ago? Well, the first point to say is that these are mostly commercial solicitors. They're not, in general, criminal solicitors or family law solicitors. Some of them will be. But we know there's a shortage of criminal law solicitors because they're not particularly well paid. It's not a particularly attractive direction to go in if you're trained in law. So this is mostly commercial solicitors. And what it represents, therefore, is the enormous increase in the amount of commercial legal activity that's going on in the economy. And this takes us into a direction of asking, well, what use is all of that? And more importantly, to whom is it useful? And there we get into a conversation that we've been having over the last few weeks about useful and transactional production. In other words, is the activity that's going on, is it creating something new and valuable in the economy, something we can all use, like housing or food or clothing or something like that? Or is it facilitating activity in the economy, but not actually creating anything new? And if it's facilitating activity in the economy, have we got the right amount of it, or have we got far too much of it? Because facilitation is one thing, and drawing up contracts and making sure that the economy turns over well is a reasonable thing to have to do. But if all your legal activity is actually not necessary, it actually exists to extract wealth from one bunch of people and give it to another, and an awful lot of legal activity is like that now, because an awful lot of contracts are to do with the extraction of wealth from companies and the selling of companies and the reduction in, for example, the interests of employees relative to shareholders and that sort of thing. All that sort of thing is just transferring wealth from one bunch of people in the economy to another. So if that's what's going on here, if all the solicitors and accountants and all those sort of people are increasing in number because we're doing more and more of that extractive activity and less productive activity, like making things and producing services that people want and need and which improve the value of their lives, if that's what's going on, then this does indeed tell us something very important about productivity. Because although productivity is the measure of how much we can produce in an hour, for example, it's quite obvious to see that that's also a measure of how much we charge for what we do in an hour. Because in the nature of things, if we're looking at production as being measured by the amount of money that people pay and receive, then the more money you can charge, the more productive you are. But that again doesn't make sense if the increase in price doesn't reflect something of real productive value. So what we can say is that production is not being measured in a sort of sensible and rational way, because what we want is an economy which produces as much as possible of use, which we can use in our lives, which improves the quality of our lives, and as little as possible of this non-productive activity which facilitates the whole thing. So when we talk about productivity, we don't want to talk about just any old activity being productive, and the more you can, so to speak, charge for it, the more valuable it is, the more you can do in an hour, the more money you can extract in an hour, the more productive you are. When we talk about productivity, we need to say how much of our economy is producing real valuable wealth that we can consume, and how much of it is doing this transactional extractive activity that we can't consume and doesn't inherently make us richer. So if we put those two things side by side and we say at the moment, and we can see over here that's certainly what's happening, because here we can see the difference between 1950 and 2015, and we can see that the really productive part of the economy has shrunk enormously and the non-productive part has really increased. So if we look at that and we say, well, productivity inevitably has fallen over that period because we're just not producing as much useful stuff as we were. And if we say productivity can be measured in relation to the amount of useful activity relative to the amount of transactional and extractive activity, then we can see why the situation is deteriorating. So like everything else, it's a question of what we measure. If we measure productivity in those terms, we can see what's going wrong, and we have options to try to fix that, to prioritize really productive activity in the economy and not push all the money in the economy towards people who are very good at extraction, very good at accumulating wealth for themselves, but not so concerned about creating wealth for the economy and society as a whole. But if we go on measuring productivity simply in terms of how much money we can charge for things effectively, And that's going to prioritize and help professions such as law, accountancy, financial trading, all those sort of things, which may have their uses, which definitely do have their uses, but which you would think we don't want to have more than we absolutely need. So the warning signal here, with this enormous growth in the number of commercial lawyers in the economy, is that we're making life unnecessarily complicated, and that's reducing our capacity to produce real useful wealth. And in order to change that, we need, as I say, to change the way we measure things, and we need to consider how we can direct money in the economy towards productive activity and away from mere extraction. So that's the broad situation. If you've enjoyed this video, please do click the like button. That's really helpful. And if you haven't subscribed, then please do. And if you have, thank you very much. And if you want more detail on the numbers here and all the images, in fact, you can find that on the website, which is bonkerseconomics.net. And finally, if you'd like postcards of these images, they're now available to buy from the website, and you can order them. The link you'll find in the description below. Thanks very much.